I don't think there's a clear definition of what is a healthy microbiome. I think at the moment we just get it as granted that is the microbiome of people who don't have a disease.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's a really important question. It's almost a fundamental question, and it's disappointing that after a decade in this thing that we can't really answer that. And I think one aspect of that is that your healthy microbiome is different from my healthy microbiome, right? So if I suddenly had James McElroy's microbiome, I might be going to the toilet all the time, do you know? Because yours
I would hope that you'd see a whole load of benefits.
I'd probably be tremendously grateful for the rest of my life. But, so it's host specific, and that's important. And it's functionally important, and it's not pro-inflammatory. Those are functions or features rather than actually characteristics in terms of how it's made up. But it might be that a microbiome in one person that was perfectly tolerated and fine, transplant that into another person, and it might cause them an issue because it's not compatible with, what they need or what they're looking for. So I don't know anyone can answer that question yet, but we should be able to answer that question.
Yeah, but I think we should move towards the definition of the healthy microbiome, and I think we have to take into account what factors contribute to shaping our gut microbiome. So diet is one of them. So if we assume, for example, that people who've got a healthy diet will have a healthy microbiome, then perhaps in the future we should be looking at studies where we give people what we consider as a healthy diet and try essentially to use the microbiome of these people as the healthy kind of like benchmark of the microbiome.
Are there parameters that we can use to try and characterize healthy? Because I know there's no mutually, universally agreed definition per se of a healthy microbiome, but other parameters, characteristics like diversity, or you mentioned pro-inflammatory. Is there some way of breaking it down to that kind of level?
Yeah, I think there are kind of like certain markers that we consider them as indices of a healthy microbiome. Alpha diversity, so the more bacteria you've got in your gut, the more equally distributed these bacteria are in your gut. It is currently considered as a marker of a healthy microbiome, as well as certain kind of functional characteristics. So we know, for example, that short-chain fatty acids are very important for gut health and actually beyond our gut. So, for example, the microbiome, which is associated with increased production of butyrate. Again, this is a characteristic of a healthy microbiome. But again, one of the things that we have always to bear in mind is what is healthy for you may not be healthy for someone else, particularly if someone has a predisposition to develop a disease.
Are there any traits or characteristics or trends which are kind of universally observed in disease states? And I'm pushing on this because I want to get on to using the microbiome to diagnose disease.
Yeah.
Microbial therapeutics,
Yeah.
Are there any characteristics that are sort of universal across patient populations?
The most studied one is diversity, probably.
Yeah, that's right.
And there is a suggestion that lower diversity is associated with disease states, with IBD being the classic one. And I suppose what... I probably have an issue with diversity now, 10 years into this thing, because it's just maths, It doesn't really tell you what's going on in that microbiome. It just tells you that there's less abundance of things than there is in another one, And when I talk on this, I give a slide of a rainforest with lots of diverse species in it, and then I give a slide of just a tree with a wee shrub next to it, and I talk about one is a very diverse population and one is a low diversity population. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the low diversity population is wrong or is not suited well to that habitat. And I suppose we have been through an era where we've done what we can do to understand and explain these data sets, these quite complex data sets, and diversity is one way of doing that. Principal components analysis, where you plot them onto a figure, and the closer you are to another one, the more similar you are to that other one. We've kind of relied on these things for quite a long time, but actually I think the point that Kostas makes is a really good one. Actually, stop thinking about things like that, start thinking about other things like function. What does this microbiome do? does it actually help you with butyrate production, which is an essential fuel for your colonocytes? So good butyrate production should be a characteristic of a good, healthy microbiome, and that's something we can measure. So we probably need to get better at looking not just at the computer, what it tells us about what's there, or even these mathematical indices representing that, but actually integrating that with things like function. And actually, you're very good at that, I would say.
Yes, and of course, it's also important to take into account not just broad markers of microbiome, kind of like diversity, because, alpha diversity is an estimate of how many different species you've got and how equally distributed these are. But you can have two people who may have the same diverse microbiome, but, they may have different taxa, different organisms. Some of them, for example, may have more beneficial organisms compared to someone else who has the same diversity, but his microbiome comprises mostly of pathogen or pathobiont organisms. So, going back to your question, James, is in most of the studies where there is inflammation in the gut, we see a low diversity. And of course, the question here is how much of this is primary and how much of this is secondary effect,
right.
Because we know that having inflammation in your gut can affect your microbiome as well. And quite a lot of the excitement about diversity and disease comes from cross-sectional studies, or from people who already have the condition. So it's at the moment quite unclear how much of this is primary effect and how much of the secondary consequences of having gut inflammation.